Hey guys, it's Jake back with another video, and today I wanted to talk about one of the more controversial topics of Destiny as of late, and that's crafted and enhanced weapons. Right now I've been playing some other things to combat the burnout. I've been putting a lot of thought into some of the things I both like and dislike about Destiny, and there will be a bit of a series of some of those things coming up in the pipeline, but today I'll be talking about crafting and enhanced weapons just like I mentioned. Right now, my current source of burnout with Destiny is that without crafting, that loot grind has been absolutely miserable. Between the dungeon, the seasonal activities, getting the roles that I want has just been a very big pain point, and it's very hard to find the will to do stuff in Destiny. And today in this video, I'll be discussing some of the main points of crafted versus enhanced weapons and how I think both of them can exist in the system without invalidating one another. Now into segment one, crafting versus enhancing. I'm going to be talking about both systems, and disclaimer, they are both great systems. They were both great additions to the game. You don't have to like one or the other, but they have both made chasing loot a lot better. I'm going to start with crafting. For me, crafting is one of the best catch-up mechanics in the game. Most players can't afford to put 5 to 10 hours a day to get a 5 out of 5 god roll. Crafting allows for them to keep within the meta and get roles that they really want, guaranteed. I've always been a large supporter of crafting since its launch back in Witch Queen because regardless of how bad the season was, I was always logging back in to get like my weekly raid patterns and my weekly seasonal activity patterns, even if they kind of got stale for me and I didn't get the red borders within that time. And when I'm farming out those red borders, I'd be testing out weapon rolls and I'd be like, oh, okay, this works, that works. And I didn't really have to get like forced into something until I decided when I did craft the weapon that I have my perfect roll. For me, Zauli's Bane is like the perfect example. You know, that thing has been a workhorse since I got it. And I put a lot of effort into it because I grinded King's Fall from when it came out until I got that red border and all of the red borders afterwards. And when you craft it, you get that like little thing on the side where it says craft it on. It's kind of that reminder of all the work you put in. Now, this grind is definitely a little bit easier depending on how you do it. If it's active, then you get stuff pretty quickly. But if you're doing the more casual approach, you have the guaranteed bad luck protection, and it's more time conscious of people who don't have that time. Now, enhanceable weapons, on the other hand, are a great way to enhance the way people play in non-seasonal activities like ritual playlists and endgame that isn't raids. Because having weapons that are both chaseable and comparable to crafted weapons is like the perfect medium for both casual and hardcore players to scratch that itch of grinding. Having dungeon weapons be enhanceable so they can compete with raid weapons is kind of the perfect balance since it's a gateway into endgame content. I'll talk a little bit more about that later in segment 3, but there's something about getting that 5 out of 5 god roll that makes me fall in love with Destiny all over again. My only issue is obviously fighting RNG, but the fact that when you do get a weapon you want to enhance, it costs 20 enhancement cores per weapon, and that's kind of ridiculous. And honestly, I think a good way for them to distinguish themselves is to have double perk rolls, or even up to 6 like the adept raid weapons, which I'll talk about later. But other than that, I think they're just as good as crafted weapons in almost every way. Now on to segment 2, an act without crafting. Act 1 of Revenant is in the books. Let's talk about this loot grind. Every season I make a little checklist of the weapon rolls, seals I want to achieve, and the seasonal stuff that's coming out, like Festival of the Lost. And I use it to focus my time effectively because I can't just sink a bunch of time into Destiny anymore. And with this act specifically, my motivation to grind out rolls has just completely bottomed out. Like it's the lowest it's ever been. And I think the main reason is because I'm fighting RNG so hard this season. They did a complete 180 to having crafting to having just complete RNG. Like the first issue is tonics. Tonics don't work. They're timed. They require extra materials which force you to play activities you might not want to play. And even when they do work, they don't work. Like if it says Chroma Rush, you might not get that Chroma Rush. So when you're going into the seasonal activity, you're either forced into 10 waves or 50 waves. There's no in between. You don't get that option. It's either you dip out in the middle and be a dick to whatever people are in that match made activity. And within like 10 waves, you get 1 to 2 pieces of loot, maybe an extra one from the tonic if it works. So that's 3 pieces of loot. You're not guaranteed to get one, and you're not guaranteed to get the roll. So that overall experience isn't very user or time friendly, and you kind of run into the problem of not getting what you want. And when you don't get what you want, even if you do get like semi-passable rolls, you're now taking up a lot more space in your vault, which, crafted weapons didn't really have that problem. The only consistent place to farm stuff is Nightfalls, because they're guaranteed and rotate weekly, so you have a week to grind them out and then we'll come back. All the ritual stuff like Vanguard, Crucible, Gambit, and Trials, because they have focusing areas. And even the attunement works somewhat better than the tonics, right? And the dungeon to an extent, because you can only either pull 3 pieces of armor per encounter and 3 weapons. So again, there's still RNG, but there's less of it, right? And then you get to Festival of the Lost. So you have a time-sensitive activity with the same problem as the seasonal activity. It was dry. You had to rely on candy to focus stuff. When you were able to focus stuff, you didn't have double perk rolls. There were a bunch of bugs that were associated with it. And you had to, if you were a hunter or if you relied on a head exotic, you had to give that up in order to maximize your candy. And that's not really fun, right? How do you expect people to get the rules that they want? Like, I wanted the Vertex Road with Rewind Down and Kinetic Tremors. Not one had either perk in either column in all of my engrams that I purchased. So you can't have like this incentive to go play the game if you're not kind of being respected in your time. Like, the only thing I actually invested a lot of time in was Garden of Salvation, and I had to relearn the road kind of fun, and I kind of told her when it was playable. So it was nice to have that, but overall everything else is just good overall. Now onto the third and final segment, Raids and Dungeons. Before I do my takeaway and summary of the video, I want to talk about Bungie's best implementation of these systems. And honestly, aside from the 2 gripes that I have, this is the best way that they found, and it doesn't really subtract from each other, and the system I think is fair. Now, the 2 critiques I have are how loot drops work in Raids and Dungeons and the rotator system. Now, loot drops, you should be getting a piece of gear plus a weapon. You should not be getting one or the other. The loot pool is small enough. You should not have to be competing for rolls with mid-rolled armor. Same thing with raids. Getting 5 pieces of armor in a raid consecutively is just a ridiculous thought. And the rotator system, yes, it's in a bit of a better state than it was initially. You get 3 for the price of 1 in 1 week. You should be able to farm whatever you want whenever you want. Dungeons are a little bit more better in that aspect because you can always farm Vesper's Host at the moment. And aside from these 2 critiques, I think that having these 2 pinnacle pieces of content be the proper example of how to implement both of these systems is very fitting. Since dungeons get only enhanceable, they're a gateway into raiding, right? Less time required, smaller loot pool. It's kind of fair that that system is only enhanceable. Now for raids, having a crafted thing kind of helps the more casual players get into raiding, even if they, kind of have trouble getting into it, whether it's because they're loadout or, people are kind of being pricks towards them. You at least get them to go try it out once a week, and over 5 weeks you get one of your choice. You might get some red borders in between there. And for the more adept players, no pun intended, you have master raids, enhanceable, multiple perk rolls, incentive over crafted weapons, and it's a reward for you being a better player. And honestly, this scratches both itches, because you can, if you're good enough, you can get to that grindy part if you really want it. And with dungeons, the only thing I would suggest to make it a bit better and a little bit more comparable to raids is the adept system. They should have adept weapons. And they should also have more perks available to them, not to the extent of 3 perks per column, but an extra perk in the last column or something, just to kind of balance it out, since they are only enhanceable. But that's just kind of a general rule I have with crafted versus enhanced weapons. Now, the general takeaway from this video is that both systems have a place in the game, and they should be restricted to certain aspects of the game, A, to make the grind a little bit more balanced, and to give people options. Right now, I have a graphic on screen where I would have either one of these specifically for that area of the game. Neither system should be taken out, but expanded on, so people have a choice in how they want to play and grind the game. All enhanced weapons, regardless of their source, should have multiple perks in each column just to keep them competitive with craftable weapons. And crafted weapons should only be more of a guaranteed bad luck's protection against the horror that is RNG in this game. So screw FOMO, respect your fellow guardians, and I'll catch you in the outro. I just want to say thank you guys for making it this far into the video. Let me know what you think of my take. I'd love to hear your different opinions. If you have any suggestions on how I can improve my content, I'll do my best to kind of incorporate that in videos in the future. Until then, Guardians, I'll see you Starside. Peace.